were only allowed to sell 2 N95 masks per person per day. And you need to use your ID card to buy it with. And the price was very reasonable. It was like, I think it worked out to like $1 US for an N95 mask.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not many people are wearing N95 masks here, but it's really good to know that you can go and get it in case you do have to take your kids to the hospital for something, or you're going to be going into a high-risk environment and you want to use something a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how they handled it. And I know there's a lot of people who are opposed to this idea, talking about price controls or things. They're saying, well, that's not how our society works. You know, it's just supply and demand. And this
well,
is
in a time like this, that's how it needs to work. Because that's a health risk. This is health and endangerment of other people if you hoard it.
Yeah, well, there's that. And then it's like, at what point do you say our city sewage system is overflowing into the streets because people are now using alternatives to flush down the toilet? At what point do you say, okay, maybe in situations like this, we can have a little bit more flexibility in terms of price controls and quantity controlling and stuff like that? I mean, that's my personal opinion, but I know there's a lot of people who disagree with that.
Well, if they say, everybody else stay home except for essential workers, they can put categories on people. Why don't they put categories on goods and say in times when we call a national emergency or a statewide emergency or whatever it might be, then those goods automatically go on to a, like a system where you can only buy so much at a time on certain goods.
Yeah,
clearly toilet paper. In the US, that's the first thing. It's the most essential item.
We saw that in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we saw that too. And there were, on the mainland side, that I think it happened in Hong Kong before it happened in the US. And the mainland side, we were just looking over like, what's going on? We were seeing these images of Twitter where, because, people's apartments are really small in Hong Kong. And there's pictures from people taking a picture of other people's homes, and you can see their window is completely covered by packs of toilet paper that they bought and stocked up on. Now, like 20% of their house is filled by, toilet paper.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's so terrible. So what is the sentiment like now? What are you guys thinking? Because, there are still cases in China that are found every day, but very few. So something like 40 or less than 100 every day.
And a lot of them are coming in from outside. So it's an interesting dynamic. So people are feeling really, really safe on the ground here, but they're aware that the biggest risk is a second wave potentially coming back in from outside.
Yeah.
And it's created an unfortunate situation where foreigners are being treated kind of suspiciously. The fact of the matter is that even, it's more likely that a Chinese had traveled overseas and come back, but they're not visually identifiable outside. So people are getting a little bit nervous around foreigners now. And we've even seen some places like gyms going as far as saying, we're really sorry, but some of our other customers might be nervous and we can't accept foreign customers right now. And that's an unfortunate thing. But the government saw that this is a problem from quite early on, and they've released guides in terms of anti-discrimination guides about respecting foreigners' privacy, space, even in respecting their religion, which some people won't believe is on the document also. And also they play videos in the subway stations, and all the subway stations, they talk about not discriminating against people and trying to explain that this is irrational. And so it's really encouraging. So although it's unfortunate to, as a foreigner who's been on the ground for this entire thing, to all of a sudden now face that issue. I haven't personally found had any sort of discrimination against me, but I've heard from some friends who have, but it is something they're working on. And I think it's a really big contrast compared to when leaders right at the top of your country is, in certain countries are saying things like calling it the Chinese virus.
Well, yeah, like our lovely Trump, who's going around saying the China virus, the Chinese virus.
Despite knowing what that does. I mean, the World Health Organization decided that this is a good idea to not name it after places after the swine flu, because when we referred to H1N1 as swine flu in the beginning, it caused a panic around the world where people were just slaughtering pigs, even though it was a human-to-human transmission problem at that point. And the interesting thing for me, what I said before, was that if you try to explain to people, we shouldn't call H1N1 swine flu because of these implications to, innocent pigs around the world, they'd be like, okay, all right, that kind of makes sense. But then when you explain to them, we shouldn't call this the Chinese virus because Asian people are getting beat up in the streets, some of those same people are going to be like, well, no, it came from there, so I'm taking a stand on this. It's like, really, come on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting that you're experiencing, or well, that foreigners in China are experiencing the discrimination. When over here, it's the Asians that are, that are experiencing the discrimination. So,
I got to clarify though. It's nothing like, we're not seeing a kind of assaults or anything like that. It's just people. It's a nervousness, and in that regard, people who were from Wuhan, if people knew you were from Wuhan, if you were Chinese, they would be nervous around them also. So it's
yeah.
not really specifically a race issue per se, but we are visually identifiable, and it just so happens that the virus is mostly coming in from outside. But
Yeah.
again,
And from here, we're thinking it's coming from China. And so it's like interesting how both sides are kind of looking at the other like it's
now.
you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But people are asking me all the time if I feel any discrimination or if I'm experiencing any of that. I don't think I look Asian enough for people to automatically look at me and think, oh, she's from China. She's but my mom, who's Vietnamese, a lot of people can't tell the difference between Vietnamese and Chinese and Korean, and and I don't blame them if they're not too familiar. But I don't, but my mom lives in an all Asian area, mostly Vietnamese area, so she's not really experiencing any of that. And I was in Idaho quite a bit the last month, and I didn't, when this was all starting to come out, and we were seeing a lot of the stuff coming from China, and nobody ever said a single thing to me, even in Idaho. So I mean, I'm sure that there are maybe, I've definitely heard of stories of people not wanting to order from the Chinese restaurant or not wanting to visit Chinatown because they're more afraid of, have they been to China to visit their family? And have they come back and brought it? So, I made an effort in the very beginning when this was happening to order Chinese food every day, even though American Chinese, it's obviously not real Chinese food. But, I was ordering Chinese food, even though I don't even really like American Chinese food, but I was ordering it anyway. Just to, give them.
The thing is, I mean, I think in some cases when you're seeing these attacks, it might be just people who are, to start off with, are kind of racist or bigoted, and now they have an excuse to kind of let it out. And to the people, and I did a podcast on this to kind of encourage people, saying we will get through this. This happens. After 9/11, it was brown people who were targeted. I'm mixed also. My father is white from England. My mother is from South America, from Guyana, and obviously I'm brown, and I definitely felt a change in the atmosphere, and I definitely had to take my shoes off for an additional inspection at the airport more often, after those incidents, and it does. It was an awkward situation for a period of time, but it passes, and somebody else is going to be the target the next time. And I think the best thing we can do is use this as a learning opportunity for people who are experiencing this now. They're more likely to stand up against it when they see it happening to the next group of people, and they can kind of empathize with them a bit more. So I think, it's important to kind of take whatever we can to learn from this.
For sure. I mean, as a kid growing up, I had to deal with it a little bit because I am Vietnamese. And I did have a couple of run-ins as a kid with Vietnam vets that were not, they would be a bit mean about me being Vietnamese, and they would maybe call me a name. They would laugh it off and think they were kidding, kind of. But it definitely stuck with me a little bit. And so whenever I'd meet somebody who was a Vietnam vet when I was younger, I'd get a little nervous. Like, oh, if I tell them, when they ask me what I am, if I tell them I'm Vietnamese, are they going to, say something?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in an all white kind of town just north of Toronto. And so, of course, I experienced that also. But I'm glad I did, though, because all of these experiences really shape the way we think about things. And we're able to comment on it when it's happening again to someone else. But,
right. And ultimately, those guys were absolutely of no consequence to my life. I mean, they couldn't do anything except maybe say something. And then what? It was like, okay, loser.
I like what Ricky Gervais says. He talks about, haters on Twitter and stuff like that. And you know how bad they can get on Twitter. And his take was like, they're literally yelling at me from a garbage can. What is
right. So this is going to be, obviously, I think what we're realizing now is that this virus, and even today, Dr. Fauci here in the US said that this is looking like it's not going anywhere, that it's looking like it is spread too far around the world, that it is now going to be seasonal. It's probably going to come roaring back in the fall. And because, as soon as we get control over it here, Australia is probably going to have a spike because it does look like it's maybe spreading with weather. Brazil, it's just too far gone now. And so over there in China, are people starting to realize that, at some point we're going to have to open our borders up really again? People are going to we have to resume a life of normalcy again. And this virus is probably going to come back with a second wave. Is there any talk of that and what you guys will do?
So I just received, and I didn't get a chance to look at it yet, but I just received something this morning where they said that the borders are completely closed to foreigners now, because my friend sent me a warning. They said, if I was planning on leaving, just don't leave anytime soon because I won't be allowed back in. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is still some hope, no matter how little it is, that people will start taking this seriously. I mean, even if that's true, I hope that people don't use it as an excuse to just start relaxing, because I think the key will be, even if that is true, is to buy us enough time to wrap our heads around this and figure out what the best treatments are, perhaps get a vaccine in place and all this stuff. So I worry that by saying that, it makes people relax a little bit too much and just say, you know what, we're all going to get it anyways.
Well, that's kind of my attitude, to be honest with you. I'm kind of like, at this point, I think China tried plan A as best as possible, which honestly, if you're the epicenter of a breakout, it is your moral and ethical obligation to attempt, which is lock down and try to get rid of this thing, right? Just try to isolate it and eradicate it from the human population so that it doesn't end up becoming part of our seasonal viruses. And so that is plan A. And I think China had an effort at that, but unfortunately it is just too late. And now we have to really deal with the consequences of plan B. And plan B is, there's just no way we're going to be able to wait this out for a vaccine. That's 1.5 to 2 years away. If they really sped it up, it would maybe be in a year. But then you have to ask yourself if you're willing to take a vaccine that has been rushed. I know I'm not. I'm not willing to have them inject something into me that they rushed through, and because they're desperate to open the economy, they're desperate to get back to normal, and then they inject us all with something crazy. So unfortunately, I think at this point, we're getting more and more data, obviously, about what this virus is, how deadly it is for certain demographics, and it's about protecting that particular demographic, and the rest of us are just going to have to get to a point of herd immunity, whether it be through vaccines or getting it and becoming immune, if that's possible. But unfortunately,
I think buying ourselves time is still important. And again, the risk of people focusing on that too much, and it's a valid argument, and it's probably what we're going to have to deal with. But we can see what it looks like when hospitals become overwhelmed with this. And we can see that it's not only people with this who are going to be affected, just like you spoke about those other people who aren't able to visit their family in the hospitals for completely unrelated issues right now. And, if we just all of a sudden just embrace that idea that says, we're all going to get it anyways, it's just going to be too much at once.
Certainly too much at once. We'd have to come up with a plan. But I think starting that conversation and acknowledgement first, if we just remain in denial, we'll never even come up with a plan. So we're just slowing down the process of even coming up with a plan. So
right, yeah. I mean, I personally think that. I agree with some of the measures that were taken by places like Singapore and Korea. It's too late for that because they
too many people have it. I mean, now
on.
The UK, the Imperial College of London, when they originally came out with the study saying that millions were going to die, they were the ones that came out with that. Well, now they came out with a kind of an adjusted model today. And they said, well, actually, we don't think it's going to. They actually said, well, actually, we think way more people have it than we originally thought. They're saying that they think maybe up to 50% of the UK already has it. So, if it's spread that fast, and because maybe it is a super spreader. It just goes all over.
I think there should probably be the doctor that I spoke to. He's working on testing people to see what kind of antibodies they have to actually prove that they already had it. And I think instead of just assuming this, they should actually follow up with this and test them and say, okay, is this really actually true? Because there's a lot of talk and a lot of narrative like this that does push us towards the risk of just giving up a little bit too early. China has proven you can control this, but what's the likelihood of other countries doing the same thing as China? It's
too much.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even South Korea said we're not doing that. They said we're not doing that because we're a democratic republic. It doesn't work for us. And then
Right.
meanwhile, the West, which is supposed to be where democracy was born, goes and says, we're locking down. And if you exit, in France, they're ticketing people quite a bit. And there's a bit of even violence that people are reporting from going out, and then the police gathering them up and saying, get out of here. So, but, I guess my take on it is I feel like it's kind of time to face some facts a little bit. And it comes down to the sooner we have that understanding that it's not likely now. I mean, it was a heroic effort. It was a heroic attempt. And I do think you should absolutely try to isolate and eradicate the minute you see a new virus pop up. And I think that's a lesson that probably China is learning, is that the minute a doctor says, hey, we got something, it's kind of weird, never seen this before, to take that seriously. Don't silence the doctor. Of course, you have to manage a bit of, obviously, public panic is something that also is a type of virus that has to be managed as well.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. That's the thing also is, there's not much. I mean, so China has censorship. Everybody knows that. But there's no, this might sound odd, but no transparency to the censorship. I had this idea that I think China should, at the end of each year, tell its people what it censored and why they censored it, with reasons.
It'd be nice if YouTube would do that too, right?
Yes, exactly. That's a good point. But I think one of the things we don't know, and the data that we're not working with, is how many times did something similar happen where a doctor who wasn't even in that category, who was, I believe he was an optometrist, how many times before did a doctor want to do the same thing and it would have caused panic on something that actually really did turn out to be nothing? We don't have that information.
Right.
So it's really hard from the outside to just say, okay, they need to do this differently. At the end of the day, they still genome sequenced it pretty quickly. They still released all of the information to the public so people could prepare their test kits and everything like that. I probably do think there are some things that they're going to learn from this and they're going to do differently next time, but maybe not as extreme. Maybe it won't be as different as people imagine. Mm-hmm. Because again, we don't have the information for how many times did they do this and it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. It's like you can't just take every doctor that comes out and says, I see something and it's, we got to alert everybody, because that would be every day. Every day. There, we see it all the time, the conspiracy theorists that are alerting the public to XYZ that is going to be harmful to them. And I mean, just imagine if we took every single one seriously right out of the gate and then just said, everybody hunker down, it's coming, the end of the world. This is it. This is the plague. So, I mean, it is hard to criticize reaction, and it's, it's like, okay, what was the right thing? What was the wrong thing to do? In this case, it turned out that doctor was right. Right. But how, like you said, how many times are they wrong and saying the same thing? So that is where it gets really interesting. But yeah, I just was wondering what the sentiment was over there. We are starting to hear now every day, like Dr. Fauci came out today during the press conference, and this was the first time he said, yeah, like it's looking like we're not getting rid of this and it's going to come back seasonally. So we're hearing more and more doctors saying, we kind of failed at that. So. Yeah.
From the sentiment on the ground here, I don't, at least the people I spoke to, I don't get the sense that they think this is not going to be controlled outside of China, that it's inevitably going to come back to China from the outside. They see all the controls being put in place. And you're right, though. I mean, how long can they keep themselves isolated? But people aren't thinking about that right now. I mean, we saw the lengths that China went to control this domestically, how many businesses they shut down, how much of the economy they sacrificed for this. So who knows? Who knows how long they're going to hold out and just say, okay, nobody's coming in. If you guys want herd immunity, okay, we wait until you it's not, spreading.
Yeah, it'll
anymore,
be interesting to see, because, the problem with it now, I think what this kind of showed was that there has to be but it's like, how do you do this? There has to be a worldwide effort, an immediate worldwide effort, that the minute when China came out in January and said, we got a problem, everybody in the world, every nation in the world would have needed to immediately react exactly the same in uniform. And it's like, how is that going to happen with all of the various nations, all the different cultures, all the different, the different wealths in each nation? Some are more well equipped than others. I mean, so to have a blanket strategy, which is kind of what was needed, is kind of impossible.
Yeah, that raises that reminds me of a really interesting comment I got on one of my videos. They spoke about how when this happened and Wuhan was the hardest hit area, China sent doctors all over the country there, all hands on deck. Obviously they had some skeleton staff behind and the just in case, but they put as much effort as they could on Wuhan. And you would think somewhere like the EU, when Italy had this crisis, that other EU countries could do the same thing. They say, okay, we're coming. We're gonna put all our effort together with you and fix this.
No, it was the Chinese that showed up first.
Yeah, I mean, I even saw I saw on Twitter I don't know how real it is. I saw an Italian guy taking down the EU flag and raising the Chinese flag because of this, like
because it was protest. The Chinese that came to Italy's rescue before anybody else. The Chinese were on the ground, and that is like, I mean, where you're right. Where were the Germans? Where were the Brits? Where were the French? Where were they? They just let Italy struggle. And Italy has the second best healthcare system in the world. One of the reasons why Italy is hit so hard is because of their excellent healthcare system. People don't realize that, but they've been able to, they have the second oldest population in the world behind Japan, and they have the second best healthcare system in the world. And so because they've been able to keep their population alive for longer, unfortunately for them, they ended up having a very old population. They have the oldest population in the EU, and this virus tends to really like older folks. And these people were already on kind of extensive life-saving treatments already, and this virus came and said, "No, now's the time." And so it actually kind of gives credit to Italy's healthcare system to show that they were able to keep people alive longer than other nations, but unfortunately, then the virus came.
Yeah. No, that's it.
Yeah. So
I mean, go ahead.
Well, the point of the world needed to be in a cohesive, needed to react all as one. A big Borg, a world Borg, right, needed to be formed. And suddenly the world needed to react. And, China can't control the world. China can only control China. So China did what they could do. But then I'm sure they sat there and expected the rest of the world to react. And the rest of the world kind of sat around saying, oh, okay, we'll see. And maybe to China's shock and horror. But now, unfortunately, if we do go the strategy even of herd immunity, which I do think is unfortunately what we have to do at this point. I don't think there's a way around it. But then the whole world has to be in on that too. It can't just be one country does it and another country doesn't. Right now Sweden is doing it. They're just saying we're going to develop herd immunity. The Netherlands and the UK, when they realized this was too out of hand and that they were just too far gone already, they said to their population, this is what we want to do because plan A, we're beyond that now. We have to do herd immunity. But that freaks people out. And I understand it's scary. It's, you're saying to people, you're going to get a virus, and nobody wants to be told that. That's an extremely scary thing to tell somebody, especially when the media is out there saying, and you're going to die. Right. Because they're saying the death rates are not what the media is, really what social media is more circulating around. The Germans who have excellent data and the Chinese who have excellent data are showing that is not actually the case so much. But, again, that would have to be a worldwide concerted effort. And I think emotionally, even though I think that is the only real logical that's unfortunately the path forward. Human emotion is not ready to accept that. Human emotion is not ready. And then we'd have to have a worldwide concerted effort of, okay, now that we know that we have to do that, of course, we can't just say, everybody go get it. You can't do that because there's certain vulnerable population.
In terms of controlling the timing, our medical system is not ready to deal with that
either.
Right,
we have to build it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I understand with the doctors here, they're doing a lot of follow-up testing on people who had this now. And they are checking to see if there are any long-term effects to their health. There's some reports of people still showing, lesions in the chest and all this kind of stuff. This is pretty new. So the idea to say that too quickly also, we need to make sure that we really know, are there any long-term effects from this and all kinds of other questions we need answered. If there is a effective drug around the corner, can we just, add a little bit of time to it?
I mean, it would be great if there was a drug that could maybe treat the symptoms. But again, you're risking it. I mean, at the end of the day, even if they came out with a drug and said, okay, look, we've got a drug that it's not a vaccine, but this drug will at least it will help with, the symptoms a bit. you're still
Right.
risking it. It's still risky. You're still
Yeah.
telling somebody you're going to get a virus. But hey, if you
Yeah.
get it, we can at least maybe help you. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
this is
my key is try to get us. Well, my opinion is to get us to a point where people are. It's okay to get this virus now because we have the capacity to handle it. We have the medical system ready for it. We know already what the most effective treatments are.
right.
And so that's my only fear about people just saying, of course, accepting the fact that this is probably where it's going to go. It's going to be herd immunity, but
Yeah.
to make sure people aren't using that to just go on some sort of a boat cruise somewhere now with a bunch of other people because they know they're going to get it anyways, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have to be careful with it. But at the same time, I mean, we can't fight Mother Nature forever. I mean, we can try our best, but, she's going to unleash things on us. And, I mean, it's, you know, this isn't going to be the last time that
No.
this
Yeah.
happens.
And
So,
that's the key is to make sure we're learning as much as we can from this, and that was one of the things I mentioned also was that there are places that are focusing so much effort on blaming China that they may not even look to China for examples of okay, what can we learn from how
right.
they controlled it, how they handled it, how they treated it. Jack Ma from Alibaba, he released a really big guide also with all the best practices, all the things he noticed that in a particular hospital that worked and didn't work. I mean, I hope people because of their focus on just blaming right now, that they don't forget that there's a lot of valuable information they can take out from here.
Yeah, I mean, what I learned from this whole thing was I hope every major, every new virus that breaks out in the world that unleashes to the world starts in China. That's what I hope, because I can count on the Chinese to do everything possible to try to get rid of the thing.
Yeah,
To go to extraordinary
be.
measures.
I know what you're saying, and I said the same thing, but you got to be really careful about how you say it. It's like, unfortunately, we wouldn't wish that China gets
No,
another
of
virus,
course.
but
No, of
the
course,
world
right.
will be the same. Yeah,
Right,
I know
but
what you're
if
saying.
if it's going to originate anywhere, you want it to originate in the safest possible place where people are
Yeah,
going to say,
with the highest chance of containment.
yeah. And that obviously is China. I mean, to build a hospital in 10 days, that was clearly a plan that was in place. To have, everything that was done to tamp down on this thing so quickly and to be able to control it. I mean, now, unfortunately, China's going to have to ask the question of now what? Now if we open up the borders, they're just going to come flooding back in. And that is what they've seen in Asia, is that anytime any of the restrictions have been relaxed, like in Singapore or Taiwan,
Macau also. Yeah.
they get a spike in cases.
Yeah.
And so, the question is, do we live in a new world where we close the borders for the next 2-3 years because even if they come up with a vaccine, then you've got to make a decision. Are you going to mandate that everybody take it?
Yeah.
And then how long will it take to get 350 million Americans, for example, vaccinated? 350 million. I mean, that's going to take a year of full-time round-the-clock work.
Yeah. Obviously, the mandated thing would be a little bit easier here. I mean, even to get into schools, you need to have your vaccines up to date. You don't really have that choice here to say, I'm not vaccinating my kids and we're still going to send them to school with everybody else. But yeah, that's not really possible elsewhere.
So even if they get this vaccine in the next year, you're still looking at before any of, to 7.7 billion people in the world. How are we going to do this? How are we going to pull this off? I mean, maybe the better route is if there's just a drug to treat it if you catch it. It's like, okay, we're not going to really go the vaccine route, but if you catch it, we at least have some drugs that'll prevent you from, going too far. But, most of these people, like in Italy, they said that the majority of those who passed were in their 80 was the average age with 3 severe conditions. Who knows if they could even take that medication that would help.
Right.
That's the other thing. If they have too many pre-existing conditions, it interacts with other of their medications. And I mean, there's just so much. It would take years and years before we really can understand this. And the world has never done this before. What we've never done was trying to actually defeat Mother Nature, by trying to outsmart her somehow.
Yeah.
We've never tried this. So
we're in new territory here for sure. Yeah.
It is definitely new. So trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to ask you about your experience over there in China. I mean, do you feel, so you're living under a dictatorship, we're all thinking, oh man, why would you want to live like that? Do you feel like you're censored? Do you feel like you're limited?
No.
Are you going to get in trouble talking to me? Are they coming to arrest you? Are they outside?
Yeah, they're at
Are
the
they
door. They're waiting.
listening to this conversation? Are they
They're just
spying?
they're it's a respectful dictatorship. There's police standing outside my door waiting for me right now. No.
They're at least letting
I
you
mean,
finish.
there's such a misunderstanding about how things work here, and there's more doing these kinds of things that they're doing. They care about the rights of a group more than they do an individual. And as a result, an individual ends up being more safe and in many ways having more rights, that the government can come in and do stuff like this. There are feedback systems here. There's a system called the MBLL where the public can go online and make a public complaint about the government, and it's public for everybody to see. And it's also the reply from the government is public for everybody to see.
And then when that person gets arrested and they disappear, that's also public for everybody to see. How does that work?
This is, I mean, that's a really, really deep rabbit hole where you start talking about some of these people who are working together with, overseas NGOs and stuff like that, and trying to put certain mechanisms in place here, which look like they were just written word for word by organizations like the NED and stuff like that. I'm going to get into that. That's a whole different thing. Maybe we can talk about another day, but the people here, I mean, one of my favorite things. The reason I started following you and somebody sent me your stuff was the thing that you did on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and you were able to clear up so many misunderstandings about that also. And if people are just really so convinced that there's a cultural genocide going on here, why would the Uyghurs not be expected to follow the one-child policy when that was going on? Also, they weren't restricted to that.
They were able to have as many kids as they wanted, whereas everybody else was only told one.
In certain areas, they had some that were allowed 2, and then certain areas unlimited. You had in the last 20, 30 years, you've had 25,000 mosques built. There's 3 here in Shenzhen. And, the kids, I know some people, they're ethnic minority Muslims from Qinghai. They send their kids there to learn Arabic and on the weekends. They have 10 Islamic colleges. The entry requirements and all the schools are lower for Muslims. When friends my age were in school here, and Muslims were allowed to carry their big kind of spiritual dagger or knife, whatever it's called, to school. There's just... Right.
They have like affirmative action for Muslims, and people don't realize... that it's an affirmative action plan for them.
And it's a level of affirmative action that would put any affirmative action program anywhere in the world to shame. Mm-hmm. And so that's just addressing only one thing, but it's really tiring. During the Hong Kong protest thing, I tried doing that where I was addressing these things one by one, and it's never ending. And some people just believe what they want to believe. I think the most, a lot of people have given up trying to convince anybody. And I think the most insulting thing is for Chinese who have access to the outside internet. They access the world by VPN. They go and they study in schools overseas, and they still say they love their country and they love their government. And if they don't strictly agree with all of the Westerners' criticisms about the government, they're just brandished as brainwashed. Mm-hmm. So it's like people don't really want the Chinese to have free thought. They just want them to agree with them. And it's something I've been tackling with some of my content, but
I can tell you, as a kid growing up, it was hard for my parents to understand each other. They were divorced, but I was playing translator, and it wasn't about language. It was about culture, just translating culture. They just, my dad would be like, "Oh, your mother's side does this," and they, what's about that? And they're this, XYZ, whatever it might be. They're not friendly. They're colder. They don't give hugs. They don't seem to, whatever it is. And my mom's side, she'd be like, they're lazy. That side lazy. Your white side lazy. They don't do any, it's like just a lack of understanding. Or, my mom would be like, you're going to be a doctor or an engineer, and my dad's like, you can be anything you want. You can, go be an artist. Right. My mom's like, an artist? What do you mean?
Yeah.
It's the cultural differences.
There's the cultural differences. There's perception issues. When you look at, people have such a strict idea about what freedom means, and they don't actually think about what does the word mean. Never mind that the Freedom House, says that 70% of democracies around the world lack basic freedoms. Never mind the Freedom Index from the Cato Institute which is they made a 100-page report, and it's not a pro-China report. They dedicate 3 pages to bashing China. They put Hong Kong as the 3rd freest place on earth by measurable freedoms in terms of incarceration rates, healthcare, all of this stuff.
Wow.
And that was the thing that I found the most ridiculous, was when you saw these U.S. senators coming over to Hong Kong to say, we're going to help bring you freedom. The U.S. is ranked number 17 on that list.
Right. Hong Kong's like, no, we're going to help you have some freedom. Like, let us take over your government for a minute.
And I think to start to try to begin exploring this idea of freedom and why even some African nations would rather take China's route. I'm gonna plug somebody named Dambisa Moyo here. She did a TED talk on, is the Chinese system the best system for developing African nations? Mm-hmm. And she really nails it in terms of prioritizing economic freedoms and other kinds of freedoms over political freedoms. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of how the political system works here, it is there are feedback systems in place, and it is way more accountable than people think. It's changed immensely from the time I arrived in 2008 to now. In 2008, you'd have government officials who were really, a little bit full of themselves. They knew that they were in charge. And one of the biggest efforts of this government so far has been to crack down on corruption. And when you deal with people here now, it is completely different. When my friends go back to their hometowns, you get the sense that they're there to serve you. They're nice to you. They're friendly to you. Even the first year I opened my bar, during the first couple of years, during Chinese New Year periods of times, you would have officials coming around, inspectors for different departments, and they're looking for handouts. They're looking for little red envelopes to not find any issues with your mm-hmm. places. That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, I'm sure corruption still happens in some places, but it's like night and day. Yeah. And I just feel like the progress that I've seen, the fact that there's an ability for the government to listen to us, showing how they stepped up to the plate for us also when they noticed the issue of foreigners being discriminated against or being treated suspiciously during this period of time. I never experienced any sort of a campaign like that in North America after 9/11, where there was such an effort to post things all over the place saying, guys, you shouldn't be doing this. So in terms of my version of how I see freedom, I feel more free here than I would in a lot of other places.
Really interesting. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing, what it was like during the lockdown there. It doesn't sound actually what you went through in your area much different than what I'm experiencing here in Los Angeles as far as what we can and cannot do, except we, of course, don't have the big, locking down of the whole building if somebody's suspected of it, because they're not testing. They're not testing. So those of us that think, well, maybe I have it, they're not testing us, and they're certainly not quarantining the building. They're certainly not, getting us the food delivery. And we're, there's all kinds of issues as far as coordination and collaboration. And, we have like a lot of problems, but, we're still getting through it.
Yeah, we'll figure this out. And like I said, hopefully we learn something from it and have systems in place that fill these little gaps that we're noticing now.
Yeah, and to the credit to the West is we haven't gone through this ever. China has. Asia went through SARS, and Africa dealing with Ebola. So I'm sure they've got more measures in place even there. But the West really hasn't gone through this that much. I can't think of another time. Of course, we had the 1918 flu pandemic, but other than that, that was so long ago.
Yeah, the interesting question for me would be is if, because with H1N1 coming from North America, if that had happened in China, would they have reacted the same? Would they have classified the severity as the same? So when we say that we haven't experienced this in the West, it maybe because of that, people will say we just never actually did anything about it in the West.
Yeah, you're right. It's true, because H1N1, that was when Obama was president. And it was 2008, 2009. We had just experienced a horrible economic crash. He didn't call it a state of a national emergency on it, and put in some extra, help, I think, for hospitals and medical workers. But other than that, I don't think anybody really. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't. So another thing that's very different is social media. We didn't really have as many people on social media as we do right now. We also have right now, because of Donald Trump here in America, a much more heightened awareness to politics. More people are aware of what's going on. And so right now we were just primed for panic. Whereas in 2008, 2009, you're right. I mean, H1N1 came roaring back, and that was the 1918 flu pandemic. I mean, people were saying, they're saying this, oh, you know, this is going to be it. This is going to be like the Spanish flu. And it was like, no, actually, we already had that come back, guys. You just didn't really hear about it so much. And that killed a lot of people. I mean, they think that killed maybe 100 to 500,000 people around the world.
That's right. Yeah. The numbers, the estimates are pretty high. It's still going around.
Much higher.
And so to what you said, maybe that's, you know, despite all the best efforts, maybe that's what's going to happen with this also. It will slowly kind of make its way around. But I mean, we'll have to.
Yeah. Now H1N1 is what? That's influenza type A, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
exactly.
You know, they just call it type A now. They don't want to freak you out so much. But,
it's not scary anymore. Yeah.
Right. To not tell you, oh, by the way, you got the Spanish flu. Don't worry. All right, Daniel. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on the show.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So Daniel Dumbrell, you can check out his YouTube channel. I do have the links down below. The link to the interview with the doctor who was really, truly on the front lines. We talk about hearing stories from doctors on the front lines. This doctor was in Wuhan, in the front lines, at one of the temporary hospitals, I believe, that they just erected out of nowhere. And that is an excellent interview to watch. And you can get to Daniel's channel through that link. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much.